What's up guys, Rogue9 here, and since Finka's Spear 308 has only just received a bit of a damage buff, what better time to finally put out a loadout meta video where we compare the Spear Assault Rifle with the 6P41 LMG. The machine guns in Rainbow Six Siege are pretty decent nowadays, and the Russian one is definitely no slouch, but can it stand up to the freshly buffed sci-fi rifle? Let's go and find out. And before we get into the stats, can we first go off on a little bit of a tangent and take in the full glory of the Spear 308. This has to be the most futuristic looking weapon in Siege to date, and the longer I look at this gun, the more I get the feeling that something isn't quite right with it. If we compare the Spear to other bullpup rifles in the game, there is one key difference that starts to become apparent. See, pretty much all magazine-fed weapons in the world, be they fully automatic, semi-automatic, or even bolt action, work in such a way that the bolt assembly travels backwards over the magazine and then, as it comes forward again, picks up a bullet and feeds it into battery. For this to work in a bullpup rifle, there needs to be sufficient space behind the magazine for the bolt to travel all the way back past the entire magazine, and that's where the concept of the Spear 308 falls apart. There just isn't enough space for the working parts within the gun to move as they need to, at least not without some stupidly complex engineering. So if the Spear could not work in real life, was it just completely made up by some designer at Ubisoft? Well, no. I did some digging, and interestingly enough, it is based on a real-life concept from 2009 called the Tsarich. But that concept was essentially made up by a Russian design student named Andrei, as part of his final year project. And he wasn't even a weapons design student or anything like that, just a regular art student, and that finally explains it all. The reason why the Spear looks like a space gun that would never work in real life is because that's what it is. It would make a great prop in a sci-fi action film, and despite the fact that this weapon would never function in real life, I have to hand it to Andrei. For a mock-up made by a student, this is an amazing piece of work. Nicely done, my guy. Okay, tangent over, let's get to the stats. As always, we'll start out with a brief overview of the headline stats for both guns, and as is quite common in Siege nowadays, the two guns look quite well balanced at first glance. Even after the very recent buff to the Spear, the advantage of raw damage per shot is definitely on the side of the machine gun, which of course also has the added minor advantage of the slightly longer damage drop-off distance. The fire rates for both guns are very similar, and despite the Spear coming out on top here, the damage per second output is still a good bit higher for the 6P41. So far things are looking quite good for the LMG, but what happens when both guns come up against full health opponents of various armor types? Which gun will come out on top in terms of the required shots to down or kill and time to down or kill? At close ranges, before damage drop-off, compared to the Spear 308, the 6P41 will need one less shot to down or kill in 5 out of the 12 permutations of shot placement, rook armor status, and baseline armor type of your opponent. Not too shabby really, and once we factor in the fire rates, that means around 81 milliseconds of time to down or kill saved in each of these 5 cases, while the faster fire rate of the Spear will lead to a time saving of between 5 and 13 milliseconds in each of the other cases where both guns need the same number of hits. So even though there are more cases where the Spear is better, the comparatively small advantage that it will get means that on average, if we assume an even distribution of permutations in these tables, the LMG still comes out on top. And at longer ranges, after damage drop-off, this advantage becomes even more pronounced. There are only 3 cases where both guns will require the same number of hits, and in the other 9, the 6P41 will save 1 shot each time. And in these 9 cases, the average time saving is 73 milliseconds, whereas the Spear again only gets between 8 and 10 milliseconds of an advantage in the other 3 cases. So at longer ranges, the LMG definitely has the greater takedown power. More damage per shot, more damage per second, and in many cases, fewer shots to kill and lower time to kill all add up to a very compelling argument in favor of the 6P41, but of course we also need to consider other factors such as capacity, reload time, target acquisition, and controllability. The capacity of the LMG is unsurprisingly much better than that of the rifle. You get to play with 100 round belts and have a total of 401 bullets to play with. More than enough to mow down the entire enemy team and your own team several times over each round. But of course, with great capacity comes great reload time, and whereas the Spear's 3.3 seconds from empty and 2.4 seconds tactical is just about as average as you can get for the rifle class, the 6P41 comes in with a massive 8.5 seconds from empty, and when you go for the tactical reload, it's also exactly 8.5 seconds. Okay. I just have to go off on one little tangent here again because this is just too much. First off, why does this gun still come with a reserve ammo capacity of 301 bullets? This makes no sense at all. What? So Finka is carrying a total of 4 massive ammo boxes, 3 of which are filled with linked belts of 100 shots each, and then there is one whole box that contains a single bullet that is somehow also a belt all on its own. How does that even work, and why would anyone do that? Okay, fair enough. I know that this silliness is still a remainder of the way the 6P41 used to work in Siege. Back in the day, this open bolt, belt-fed LMG used to be able to hold +1 round in the chamber, which in general is not how open bolt guns work, and eventually this error was patched out. Here's the thing though, because the Russian 7.62x54 ammo is rimmed, each bullet has to be extracted backwards from the belt first and is then fed into an intermediate position from where it is then pushed into battery and fired once you pull the trigger. So the upshot of this is that the PK family of machine guns that the 6P41 belongs to can actually hold 1 extra bullet, and the fix from the past was completely unnecessary. The reload animations for both the tactical and full reloads for this gun are also incorrect, but at the end of the day, the reloads for all 4 of the belt-fed LMGs in Rainbow Six Siege have errors in them, so this gun is no exception. Would it be nice if the game got these details right? Yes, I think so. Would these minor details be worth all the effort that would have to go into reworking the animations for all 4 of the belt-fed LMGs? Yeah, no, probably not. Fine, rant over. Back to the gun comparison. So the LMG has more ammo, but the rifle has better reload times. Makes sense. When it comes to target acquisition, the ADS time is our go-to stat, and in the past, LMGs were really at a huge disadvantage here, but no more. With the new times going live in Operation Shifting Tides, the rifle's advantage is now only 50 milliseconds. It's still an advantage, so this round goes to the Spear, but is nowhere near as bad as it used to be. Interestingly, when it comes to hipfire, both guns are very good, which is surprising for the 6P41 since all other LMGs have pretty bad hipfire. In fact, the 6P41 is so good that it beats the Spear by just a tiny bit in each case I tested, except for jogging without shooting. When standing, kneeling, prone, shooting, or shooting while jogging, the LMG is always between 7 and 9% better than the rifle. Last but definitely not least, let's look at the recoil and controllability, and here the in-game patterns tell us that without attachments, the Spear has more vertical recoil, while the machine gun has a bit more randomized dispersion. Also on display here are the recoil with compensator and muzzle brake for the Spear, and the flash hider for the 6P41, since that is the only choice besides the suppressor. A side-by-side comparison of the recoil for both guns without attachments gives us a nice visual demonstration and also confirms that the recoil charts for both guns are accurate. We can see a nice narrow dispersion from the Spear, but with a more vertical element, while the 6P41 does have a tendency to fan out over time. If we attach the compensator to the Spear, the randomized recoil is almost non-existent and the recoil will be even straighter, but you will have to control a relatively nasty jump on the first shot. The muzzle brake is the exact antidote to this first shot recoil, but of course it won't help you over longer bursts, but still, for me this is the attachment to go for on the Spear. That first shot recoil can definitely throw you off if you're not ready for it, and the horizontal dispersion is so mild anyway that it's not much of an issue. Adding the flash hider to the LMG does help it a bit, and since there's no other option to help with recoil anyway, we can save ourselves further discussion. What this test does show though is that the spear, despite its fractionally higher fire rate, is quite a bit easier to control compared to the machine gun. My final control test with both guns and the different attachments only served to confirm these conclusions. Even the 6P41 is actually pretty controllable, but the spear is certainly the easier out of the two, and I personally definitely preferred the muzzle brake over the compensator for the rifle. Just for funsies, I also ran a test on both guns while Finka's nanobot boost was active, and as long as I was not overcompensating for the sudden lack of recoil, both guns virtually became lasers as long as her gadget was active. So final conclusion, how does all of this shake out? As discussed earlier on, the 6P41 is my winner when it comes to takedown power. Yes, its fire rate is a bit slower, but in my opinion, it's not by enough to make the argument that the spear will get you significantly more headshots. When it comes to capacity and reload, it's pretty much swings and roundabouts, and the hipfire cones are similar enough to make no real difference in practice either. The only thing I would say about the spear is that the slightly faster ADS time and easier controllability will make it easier to acquire and maintain aim on your target, so after all of that it boils down to the balance between slightly more takedown power on the one side and slightly easier targeting on the other. If you can handle the recoil of the LMG, you are comfortable pre-aiming or holding angles, and you have enough discipline not to reload too early or too frequently, the 6P41 is definitely a good choice for you. If you prefer super easy handling and the ability to be a little bit more reactive, then sacrificing a bit of takedown capability might be worth it for you. So as anticlimactic as it is, I have to conclude that right now, the balance between the two guns is pretty good, and they simply have their own minor strengths and weaknesses. Which gun do you prefer after the recent damage update? The spear or the LMG? Let me know in the poll on screen now. If there are any gun stat comparisons that I've not done yet, do leave a comment below letting me know which one to do next, and if you appreciate the Loadout Meta series, do feel free to leave the video a like. And with that, thank you so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next episode.